Shortly before the 2012 presidential election, Alex Jones uploaded a video to his channel entitled Mitt Romney, Elected 45th President. In this video, he claims that in all of the wide-spectrum polls such as Harris and Gallup, that Mitt Romney was 3 to 5 points ahead of Obama, and in every single poll out there, and in every major battleground state, Mitt Romney is either tied or ahead. He also moves on to cite polls in Minnesota showing a 1-point lead for Romney, and state polls in Ohio and Colorado showing a tie. He also claims that all of these states traditionally vote Democratic. And of course, according to Alex Jones, it's all a conspiracy, because they're preparing the public to steal the election.
To people that had made bets saying that Barack Obama was going to win. Now, I ignored that when I saw that news yesterday, but then I began to see all these other headlines, how there was an 80+% chance Obama was going to win in the New York Times with a Democratic Party-connected polling agency. When all of the wide spectrum polls, we're talking about Harris, Gallup, the list goes on, show in national polls that Mitt Romney is 3 to 5 points ahead of Obama. In every single poll out there, he is beating him. In every major battleground state, Mitt Romney is tied or ahead. We're talking about Minnesota. We're talking about Ohio. We're talking about Colorado. The list goes on and on. These are traditional states that go Democratic. Now, understand something. I'm not a big fan of Mitt Romney, and I've not been out there promoting him. But whenever I see Obama using hurricane press conferences to electioneer, whenever I see the media trying to use the aftermath of Sandy that FEMA's done a terrible job on, trying to say that he's a hero, whenever I see dirty tricks like this where the betting houses, not just overseas but even in Vegas, are saying 2 to 1, 3 to 1 for Obama, when all of the historic facts and polls show the opposite, it looks like they're getting the public ready to steal the election. It's the oldest trick in the book. When they know they're going to steal an election, they try to create a bandwagon effect where people hear that there's no way Obama can lose, so they don't go to the polls. And so when they cheat in key swing states, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and people say, well, that's it. You know, Obama had such a lead, when he does not have a lead in any national poll for the popular vote, and when he does not have a lead in most of the Electoral College swing states, because it will be the Electoral College that decides this.
He has also made similar statements in an earlier radio broadcast.
All I can say. And maybe that's a good thing, because, you know, Romney in every poll, every national poll, and in all the major swing states had come to a dead heat or was 3 to 5 points, 6 points, and some ahead of Obama. And the hurricane hit, and I told you that it would let him grandstand, get the surge out of the news, get Benghazi out of the news, the Benghazi cover-up, which is now confirmed that they had...
However, if you research what the major polls actually said during the month of October, when Romney was polling his strongest and before Hurricane Sandy, you will find that what Alex Jones said here is a lie that is bolstered mostly by cherry-picking individual polls that happen to support his claims and misrepresenting the truth, as he very often does. On this website, 270towin.com, you can check the voting history of individual states, and you can see here that Ohio does not traditionally vote Republican or Democrat. You can also check Colorado's voting history and see that it is traditionally a red state that has only voted Democrat 3 times in the past 13 presidential elections at the time Alex Jones made these claims. As for the national polls for the 2012 election year, Alex Jones is wrong yet again. Here you could check RealClearPolitics.com and see all of the major polling results for the 2012 election during the month of October, when Romney was polling at his best. Mitt Romney only had a lead of 3 or more points in 2 of the 28 polls for that month, while Obama had a lead of 3 or more points of 5 polls for the month of October. If you look at the swing state polls for the 2012 election year, you'll see that they tell pretty much the same story, only in more detail, and that the odds were in Obama's favor the entire time. Colorado, New Mexico, North Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Florida, and New Hampshire are all considered swing states. They are considered swing states because the margin of victory has historically been small in recent elections, thus representing a chance for it to swing in the other direction, possibly altering the fate of an election. Of the 12 swing states, most of these states have generally leaned in the same direction for the past 20 or so years, which leaves us with states like Ohio and Florida often being the key to winning an election. This is due to narrow margins of victory and the fact that they yield a total of 47 electoral votes. If we look at the 2012 polling data for Ohio during the month of October, you could see that Romney only has the lead in 4 of the 35 different polls conducted for that month, while the rest are either tied or show Obama in the lead. For Minnesota, Romney only had the lead in 1 poll, and it was only by 1 point. This may have been the poll that Alex Jones was referring to in his video, but we'll never know that because he failed to cite a source. The rest of the polls for Minnesota show a lead for Obama. In Colorado, a state that traditionally votes Republican, Romney is doing better here than in most swing states, but is only winning about half of the polls here, not all of them. According to the exit polls, the state with the smallest margin of victory was Florida, and Romney was winning according to most polls for the month of October. Oddly enough, Alex failed to mention this crucial swing state, which is worth a lucrative 29 electoral votes. Also, Florida has picked the winner in all but 2 of the last 13 presidential elections at the time Alex Jones uploaded his video, and most legitimate political analysts actually expected Romney to win Florida based on these polls. I know it's easy to declare the winner after an election has taken place and say that you knew the whole time, but actually it was pretty easy to determine who the winner was going to be before the election. RealClearPolitics.com gathers the most recent polling data from individual states and national polling agencies, and they calculate an average based on those polls. This is known as the Real Clear Politics average. While it is a rather simple method of predicting election results, it is surprisingly accurate. For the 2012 election, RCP's final electoral map was only off by 1 state out of 51 polled states and districts, and only off by 3 percentage points in the popular vote. In 2008, their final electoral map was only off by 2 states out of 51 polled states and districts, and only off by 0.3 percentage points in the popular vote. And finally, in 2004, they were only off by 1 state out of 51 states and districts, while only being off by 1 percentage point in their popular vote projection. Some people have accused RCP.com of having a right-wing bias and continue to make those accusations to this day. This probably has something to do with the fact that they made an electoral vote prediction for the year 2000. And to say the least, this was far from what actually happened. One thing worth pointing out is that RCP.com came online in that same year, and my best guess is that they operated much differently back then as opposed to what they do today. I personally have been visiting RCP.com since 2004, and while it is impossible to be 100% unbiased 100% of the time, I might agree that there is a slight right-wing bias that persists to this day. But overall, it is my humble opinion that they do strive for accuracy in every possible way, as I can attest to the accuracy of their projections since at least 2004. Another video from Alex Jones that I would like to touch on is this one, entitled Election 2012, Pick Your Poison. In this video, he speaks of mentally ill people being rounded up to vote for Obama, and people being arrested because they voted for Obama multiple times. He discusses all kinds of left-wing voter fraud, but mysteriously fails to mention the GOP's voter suppression tactics, like providing Hispanic voters in Arizona with the wrong day to vote. This may have been a clerical error, but it seems awfully suspicious that the English version of this same document actually provides the correct voting day. And of course we have this young lady who thinks she works for the county clerk's office and is only registering people to vote for Romney.
Well, I'm actually trying to register people for a particular party because We're out here in support of Romney, actually.
And who's paying you for this?
Let me see. We're working for the county clerk's office.
Okay, you cannot come out here and register one party, lady.
Alex also claims that New York State has announced that they were going to keep election polls open past Tuesday, and proclaims that he knew there was going to be a scam and that it was going to postpone the election. He later reads part of the article that he bases this claim on and states that it is possible that voting may be permitted beyond Tuesday, and then he claims that New York is a key swing state.
People went to jail over that. This stuff is real. This goes on. I'm here to tell you, we've got reports, arrests happening, of people voting multiple times all over the country for Obama, of mentally ill people being lined up and they're putting voting machines in the mental institutions. This is coming out all over the country. I have that in my stack to have them vote for Obama. New York is announcing they are going to keep election polls open. I knew there was a scam going past Tuesday. There you go. That is postponing the election. CBS 2 New York City Board of Elections. It's possible voting may be permitted beyond Tuesday in that key swing state.
First of all, New York is not a swing state, as Democrats usually win New York by about 25 to 30 percentage points. And most importantly, saying that it is possible that something is going to happen and saying that it will definitely happen are two entirely different things. New York state law permits an extra day of voting if turnout is suppressed and the turnout of any county is less than 25% of registered voters. This does not confirm that New York will postpone the election, which of course did not happen. So why did Alex make these statements? I can't say that I know for sure, but I would find it hard to believe that someone who has been a politico of sorts for 15 years would be this ignorant in regards to election statistics. I think he is counting on the ignorance of his audience who may or may not be very familiar with election history or statistics and just take his word for everything that he says. I think that he knew Obama would win, but he also knew that various right-wing polls did not reflect the probable outcome. The right-wing media at the time of the election was buzzing with these so-called unskewed polls that showed vastly overestimated figures that had Romney in the lead. Alex Jones knew that, and he took the opportunity to make up a conspiracy story about Obama stealing an election in hopes that mainstream media just might pick it up so Alex can say that he called it. I'm not saying that voter fraud never happens, because it most certainly does, but to chalk up Obama's entire victory to all mentally ill patients and people voting for Obama several times, who have been caught by the way, is utterly ridiculous. And finally, I would like to discuss this portion of his radio broadcast that aired live shortly after the election. In this broadcast, he's conversing with Bev Harris, who was in the documentary Hacking Democracy.
Start over. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. So the most amazing thing to me was Karl Rove, who, I think we can all agree at least knows his numbers. He comes on Fox to issue a rebuttal to their numbers, and they turn to him and they say, well, now it's a science, and so that your numbers are just wrong. Listen, we have the networks all going to one operation, the National Election Pool, NEP, which gives them numbers, and this is without counting the votes, and then they just say this is the winner. And so in this odd interchange, you have Karl Rove on there saying, wait a minute, we've got 500,000 votes that haven't even been counted yet, and many of those are in Romney's strongholds. How come you've called Ohio for Obama? And they said, it's a science. It's like, shut up. Don't talk about actually counting the votes, which I think was really emblematic of what we were seeing last night. We saw...
For one thing, if you're discussing elections, it's important to understand who Karl Rove is. Karl Rove is a GOP campaign strategist, political consultant, and policy advisor who also served as George W. Bush's senior advisor and deputy chief of staff. This is important to know because Karl Rove is obviously very affiliated with the GOP, and any information that comes from him in regards to politics is going to be very biased toward his party. So asking him who he thinks will win the 2012 election would be the same as if you asked anybody from Romney's campaign staff, which is why Fox anchor Megyn Kelly made this statement when Mr. Rove had his meltdown.
Is this just math that you do as a Republican to make yourself feel better, or is this real?
If you really want to talk about somebody who really knows their numbers, we could talk about Larry Sabato, who correctly predicted 525 of the 530 political races in 2004, and in 2008 he accurately predicted all 35 Senate races and 11 gubernatorial races. He also might have been slightly off in 2012, but still not by much. Later in this broadcast, Bev and Alex rambled on about how the election was a hoax and nobody really knows who was really elected because they didn't count all the votes.
Emblematic of what we were seeing last night. We saw them, I watched them call Tennessee 11 minutes after the polls closed without a single vote counted and with no exit poll.
How did they do that? I mean,
what is this? They're clairvoyant?
So they're just setting the precedent now to just, instead of having more transparency, just totally put things into la-la land where maybe they'll close the polls a day before the election now.
Oh, yeah. Well, listen, you know, the places that they canceled the exit polls, they did it because pre-election polls, they said that they knew who was going to win from pre-election polls. They didn't even wait for exit polls. California, 25% of the votes aren't even counted yet, and they are, you know, there's very controversial proposition on there. They're, oh, yes, well, this is the one that won. I didn't even mail my ballot yesterday until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Washington State is all absentee. About 40% of the ballots weren't even in yet. And they're busily calling the election. They can't exit poll absentee, by the way.
So it's a total hoax. So, I mean, did Obama really get elected?
Oh, that's the thing. Nobody knows anything about elections nowadays. What we are doing is we're watching the TV networks announce to us who the winner is based on a single private organization called NEP. You know, they aren't even going so far as to look at the tapes that come out of the voting machines. They're just telling us before the voting machines even spit out their tapes, this is the winner.
Unbelievable. So, again, Bev Harris, documentary Hacking Democracy, you know, caught him repeatedly, you know, criminally. She's telling you now it's just polls closed. They announced the winner with no ballots counted in Tennessee. They're just announcing in other places when, you know, more than half the stuff hasn't been counted. It has now gotten, then I think from what you're saying, the worst ever, just absolutely in everyone's face.
NEP, also known as National Election Pool, is not a single private organization. They are a consortium of American news organizations who provide information on election night. NEP contracts Edison Research to perform the exit polling and make projections. And yes, Edison Research is a single private organization. Exit polling has been in practice by the various news organizations since 1968. NEP just happens to be the current incarnation of what was Voter News Service, and prior to that, each individual news organizations conducted their own exit polls. What Alex Jones and Bev Harris failed to explain is what exit polls are and how they work. Instead, they ramble on about the mysterious election process as if these organizations are pulling numbers right out of their asses while claiming it to be a science. Well, actually, it is a science. And here we have someone who is the founder and operator of an elections watchdog group who has also written a book about ballot tampering. And then we have Alex Jones, who runs several news sites and has been hosting a political radio show for over a decade. So it would be entirely reasonable to expect that someone here can explain to their listeners what exit polling is, how election projections are made, and how presidential elections work. Now, I'm just a guy with a microphone and a computer. I'm no authority on this subject, but I'm going to see if I can provide some needed assistance to compensate for their shortcomings. An exit poll is a survey of voters taken immediately after they have left the polling station. The exit polls are considered to be the most accurate of polls because this almost guarantees that every participant actually voted, unlike the pre-election polls. Exit polling is obviously not done at every precinct, so precincts are selected at random to create a sample that collectively reflects the vote of the entire state. And for what it's worth, exit polling is also conducted over the phone with voters who cast early or absentee ballots. Being that this is still just a survey, it should not be mistaken for an actual vote count. This is a distinction that both Bev Harris and Alex Jones failed to clarify. Election projections are a bit more complex, and exit polling data is just one of several key pieces of information used in making projections. The Associated Press provides actual vote totals from each jurisdiction as they are tabulated, and the data from this is compared with the pre-election polls and the voting history of each state and jurisdiction. In races that do not appear to be very close, projections may be made based entirely on exit polls. And in the case of the 2012 elections, projections were made based on pre-election polls for 19 states. As I pointed out earlier, we have 12 swing states, and the other 39 states and districts are merely foregone conclusions as to who is going to win. The 19 states that were excluded from the exit polls were states that were won by very significant leads, most of which were well over 10%. People who pay attention to elections aren't looking at the polls in Tennessee or Hawaii because we already know who is going to win those states based on past election data. In fact, I've even made an electoral map for the year 2016, and I'm calling all of the states that are colored red or blue, because I know this is how they are going to vote in 2016. And again, Alex Jones and Bev Harris both failed to point out that election projections are not to be taken as actual election results. Instead, they went on a several-minute rant saying that it's all a hoax and speaking as if CNN, Fox, CBS, and the Associated Press are electing our president without counting actual votes. Actual election results aren't made official until all of the votes have been counted, which often takes several weeks, and then finally in December the Electoral College meets and elects our president. The National Election Pool, along with Edison Research, only makes election projections. They do not elect presidents, and while they do a pretty good job at making those projections, it is worth pointing out that they have been wrong in the past. In 2000, NEP's predecessor, Voter News Service, incorrectly called Florida for Vice President Al Gore, which obviously did not happen. During the 1980 presidential election, NBC projected a victory for Ronald Reagan at 8:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time based on the exit polls of 20,000 voters. Not to mention that it was only 5:15 p.m. on the West Coast and that there was speculation that voters stayed away from the polls after hearing the results. After this, the networks voluntarily decided not to announce a winner until after the polls have closed for that state. And while Reagan had the required 270 electoral votes projected by NBC at 8:15, it needs to be pointed out that election projections can be wrong. And if the rest of the country decided not to vote based on erroneous information, then you might have a case where exit polling actually elected the president. And both the elections of 1972 and 1984 were called very early at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the 1972, 1980, and 1984 elections were all won with landslide victories. You see, if you're going to criticize organizations who make election projections, this would be a more appropriate angle because there are cases where early projections may have altered the course of the nation. For what it's worth, the 2012 election was called around 10:30, which would have been about 7:30 for the West Coast, so it is highly unlikely that a projection made a significant difference. And lastly, I would like to touch on Bev Harris's statement about Florida.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look at this. In Florida, it's just, and the anomalies are flooding in. In Florida, this happens every election. The power goes out midstream, and then all of a sudden the trend changes. It's like they're counting votes after the.
It's like in the Whodunit movie.
The power goes out. Come on.
It's like the Whodunit movie where the light goes off and somebody's got a steak knife in their neck.
And it's actually kind of a metaphor, isn't it? It's like the lights go off. Oh, here's the winner. It's really, and then Pinellas County, which is over by Tampa, they basically, now get this, Florida, they were calling Florida for Obama. It was separated by 40,000 votes. Pinellas County had just announced, we've set aside 10,000 ballots that we won't count until tomorrow.
At the time of this broadcast, Florida had not been called for either candidate. In fact, it took an extra couple of days for them to call Florida for Obama. Of course, I found no reliable source for power outages on election night in Florida, and even if it did, I highly doubt the power went out in the entire state. I really don't know much about this Bev Harris lady, but based on what I've heard so far, I hold a lot of disdain toward her credibility as an authority on elections and election fraud. As for Alex, I think he was just seizing upon an opportunity to make up another conspiracy. As I bring this video to an end, I would like to point out that there are real flaws in our election process. Exit polling is strictly regulated and banned in other countries for reasons similar to what I mentioned earlier. And given the amount of money that's involved and the overall magnitude of what's at stake in a presidential election, it's not inconceivable that election fraud does not happen to an extent. But if you are going to make claims that an election was stolen, you should at least have facts and research to back it up instead of wild speculation and lies.